let's receive the President and CEO of the Independent Grocers Alliance, the world's largest independent supermarket network with 7,500 supermarkets in 25 countries worldwide. So now I'm going to ask a round of applause for Jhon Ross.
Buenos días. Gracias por invitarme. How did I do?
Good.
That will be the last Spanish I speak for today. I've spoken in countries all over the world. I've spoken in China, I've spoken in Japan. I did a presentation one time in Japan in which all the slides have been translated into Japanese. And as I began to speak, the CEO of the company, one of the largest companies in the world, was in the front row. And he started doing this. And I thought, I've really blown it. I'm saying something he's mad about. This is terrible. And pretty soon the entire front row was doing this. They were, and then I just started speaking faster, and the translators are on the side telling me to slow down, and I was just like, this is a disaster. And then he started doing this. And I thought, I have created an international incident here. And I finally got through the presentation. I thought, oh my God, the slides were wrong, or who knows what they said, or I said something terrible. And apparently, culturally, when you're watching a presentation in Japan, doing this says, you have made a very smart point, and let me pause to reflect on this. And it was a signal back that I was doing well. I came off stage thinking I had blown it and I had destroyed our relationship with this big company. So culturally, I've come to expect that I'm going to say something stupid or do something wrong every time I speak to an international audience, and I just hope I'll apologize in advance for anything I say here that's not on target. And if any of you would like to give me some feedback, putting your head down and maybe a thumbs up would be better. So IJ is an interesting company. We're the Independent Grocers Alliance, operating in 7,400 stores all across the world. That number has almost doubled in the last 4 years. And we continue to grow. It's one of the most interesting chains, but we're a 100-year-old company. Started off in the United States originally to compete with the first emerging big national grocery chain, which was A&P. And of course, we've evolved and changed over the years. But with stores in China and in South Africa and in Fiji and the Caribbean and Puerto Rico and Canada and 2,400 stores here in the United States, I thought it might be interesting today to take a global look at the United States. So if you were going to look back at our own country here through the lens of how is it different or the same in terms of how we go to market, what makes us unusual? And I think you may enjoy the conversation today, because it leads right to the heart of what we're all here for today, is talking about the opportunities with the largest growing audience in the country. So by 2043, our country will be what they call a majority minority. And that means that the general population, white guys like me, will no longer be the majority in this country. No single population will have more than 50% of the total population. This has never happened in our country before. This is a big, huge event. There's a massive demographic change going on in our country that's been going on for 100 years that will cause this to take place. Which means that everything in the grocery industry, everything in the consumer packaged goods industry, manufacturing, which was designed to think of our country through the lens of general market, the common family, will make no sense anymore. Everything we will do will have to be through the lens of unique audiences with their own cultural backgrounds and their understanding, their own heritage, their own food preferences. Our world becomes significantly more complex when the vast majority of people are not the vast majority anymore. And through that lens, that makes the United States quite interesting. Because unlike China, or unlike Japan, or unlike most of Western Europe, where they have much more homogeneous societies, ours becomes the very different of egalitarian. We become, essentially, everything that the Founding Fathers imagined when they said, bring everyone here. It's going to be a really interesting time as business people for us to think through the lens of our industry when we're increasingly serving more and more customized audiences that have very different backgrounds than perhaps we do ourselves. If you look at Hispanics in the United States, so again, imagine we're looking back at our country through the lens of how does it compare with others. The Hispanic community in the United States would be the 5th largest economy in the world, and that's today. So you can imagine how large our economy will be driven by Hispanic heritage consumers by the time the general market is no longer the majority. Really quite fascinating. That makes it bigger than Japan. I know you can't read this in Nevada. Bigger than Japan, bigger than Germany, bigger than India. Think about the economic power and clout, and the political clout also, of this emerging powerhouse that not only was transformed the way we think about community and we think about brands and we think about shopping, but transformed the way we interact with our politicians and interact with each other on social media and digitally. And every other way that our country will change as this growing and rapidly accelerating economic powerhouse, it becomes the #1 driving economic factor in the country. And if you think about the rising power of Hispanics, so if you were to go to visit a P&G, if you were to go to visit a Coca-Cola, or I worked for Home Depot for 13 years, when you were visiting Home Depot 20 years ago, and you said, I'd like to meet the people who are in charge of ethnic marketing, or I wanted people in charge of marketing to Hispanic shoppers. They would have diverted over to a single office, over in a corner someplace, 2 or 3 people whose job it was to target an emerging minority as if they were not as important as the general market. Today, if you were to go visit those same companies, and they don't have marketing teams every bit as large and sophisticated as the folks that are doing general market, they're probably missing enormous economic opportunities. Because not only is this audience growing in terms of its economic clout, but it's growing in terms of its social clout. Because in every way that this generation, already there are more non-white children in the United States than white. If you go to local public schools, if you go to your local college, our entire culture is transforming in a way that puts social power into the hands of folks who just 20 or 30 years ago were considered, an also target. And then by 2040, Hispanics will be over half of the workforce. So think through the lens of everything that I tell you here in terms of not just marketing to consumers to buy your product, but marketing to the next generation of young people to make sure they want to join our companies. So from HR, from social, from digital, from targeting, from TV advertising to branding, in every way that we interact in our world, in the grocery industry, the food industry, and retail, we better have this understanding of this emerging target. We better have them as our primary target, or we're going to find ourselves completely and totally out of sync with the largest economic power the United States has ever seen. There's a lot of reasons that explain why communities and countries go through transition. Sometimes it's a changing economic opportunities for different segments. So we saw this back at the turn of the century, as you saw people from Western Europe and Eastern Europe coming into the United States, either because of persecution or because of conflict in Western Europe. And they brought with them trade experience, technological experience, scientific experience that allowed our country to take a massive step forward as the brightest talent in Europe migrated to the United States to avoid World War I and World War II. You also see it when you have large populations that come to another country because they're fleeing religious persecution or political persecution or economic pressures that make life in their host country untenable. There's a lot of reasons why all these things happen. What makes this so unusual and so unique is this is generational. Because the economic power, which is driving over 71% of the growth of the U.S. population, isn't first-generation immigration. It's second, third, and fourth. It's already an economic engine inside of our country driving driving change in every possible way. And for advertisers, especially people who aren't used to targeting by segment, they grew their careers just doing one commercial that sort of fit all segments. It's a real psychic shock to have to rethink how I'm going to engage with consumers, get them on board with my brand. Which means we better be much better listeners as we go forward and understanding these emerging targets. But there's another reason. And this reason is that many countries in the world, developed nations, as we moved from agrarian agricultural societies to industrialized to manufacturing and then to services, and when you watch it happen, what happens is families increasingly have two-income workers and they have fewer babies. And as females entered the workforce, their ability to have very large families, their interest in having large families declined, and they delayed actually reproduction. You can see this across the globe. Now in the United States, the good news is we're still a growing population. We still have more humans being born each year than die. And economically, that is really, really, really important. Because that's very different from what you see in Japan and China and parts of Western Europe, where there are increasingly more older and older folks who do not contribute to the tax base, being supported in their social programs and welfare programs and medical programs by increasingly fewer and fewer young adults who actually do pay taxes. When you have that split, when that balance gets out of whack, you have economic chaos. It's a catastrophe for your country. And this is why you see many of these countries scrambling to try to reverse previous policies. The China one-child policy, for example. Today there are economic incentives to have more babies. And why you see a resurgence in Western Europe of a lot of countries trying to incite to reward young females to be more interested in having babies than they were before. And yet the reality is that when politicians start getting involved in age demographics, by the time they realize they have a problem, it's too late. They're already in trouble. So when you look at Greece, and you look at Spain, and you look at Japan, and you look at China, where they had insular economies, where they prevented immigration, and where the industrialization of their countries meant that they have fewer and fewer children,